Good morning. It is Tuesday, November the 13th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. All other people that are calling themselves conservatives are really reactionaries. There are conservatives, there are faux conservatives or false conservatives, and there are reactionaries. And this country breaks down culturally into realists and idealists. The realists are the true conservatives. And then the realists, the idealists, and the reactionaries. And the reactionaries are people like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, et al. If you listen to what they're doing and how they act on their radio broadcasts, they are reacting to the Democrats, to the left, what the left is doing, what the left is saying all the time, every day. If it wasn't for the left, if the left disappeared tomorrow, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity would have nothing to say. They wouldn't have a show. Do they mean well? Absolutely. Is that enough? No. It's not good enough to mean well. Okay, you've got to know what you're doing and know where you stand in any given situation. So if to be a true conservative, you got to be realistic. The idealists are the socialists and also libertarians and objectivists. So I know that there's going to be people that are going to be surprised to hear that, have me lumping in libertarians and objectivists with the socialists, but it's a fact. And the reason that they all belong together, and not only, by the way, the libertarians and the objectivists, but also the false conservatives. Well, I'll get to that later. So all of them, what they all have in common, the libertarians, objectivists, and socialists, is they're idealistic. They're looking for an ideal society. Socialism wants the ideal social society. Libertarian wants the ideal society in regards to liberty, with maximum or perfect liberty. Objectivists want the perfectly objective society. There's differences between objectivism and libertarianism, although the differences between them are rather detailed or small differences. But the point is that they're both idealistic. They're looking for an ideal society. Now, the big difference between socialists and socialism and libertarianism and objectivism is political power. The socialists are a political force in this country. Libertarians and objectivists are not. The reason that socialists are a political force, are relevant, are influential in our society is because they have integrity. Okay? The socialists advocate the initiation of the use of force. Okay? That is what they do. They say that basically paradise on earth is inevitable, and that whatever socialists need to do to hasten that outcome is permitted. If that means using force, if it means robbery, lying, cheating, stealing, killing, it doesn't matter. Destruction of any sort doesn't matter. Okay, so they walk their talk. The reason that libertarians and objectivists are not a political force is because they contradict themselves. And they contradict themselves because they don't realize that they are idealistic. And they also further don't realize the only way to realize the dreams, the hopes, the ambitions of an idealistic political philosophy is through the use of force. It's the only way. There is no other way to achieve a perfect society without using force. Whether that perfect society is social or libertarian or objectivist. And since both objectivism and libertarianism abhor the initiation of the use of force, they end up in political exile. They end up being absolutely impotent and irrelevant. Now, libertarians every once in a while can affect the outcome of an election because they very often end up siphoning off votes that would otherwise go to a Republican or conservative. So, but that's the way that the political and cultural landscape stands. The idea is to be a conservative and to be realistic, which means that you get up every morning, you look around, and you realize that for most people, most of the time, things are pretty good. Things are pretty good. And when change is necessary and is obvious, it is change on the margins. We don't need a revolution. We don't need wholesale reform. We just need to change minor things here or there. Our immigration system. People say it's broken, it needs to be reformed. No, it doesn't. It needs some updating, it needs some changes, yes, but it does not need to be reformed. One of the things, the changes that needs to be made, is that we got to get serious about communicating to people that we're not going to accept illegal immigration. For decades, we turned a blind eye to it. We knew people were coming here illegally, and we just kind of shrugged our shoulders and didn't want to look at it. And now, because of that, we have a problem. Tens of millions of people in this country illegally. We don't know who they are. We don't know whether or not they are, we don't know their past. We don't know whether or not they are people that were in prison and what they were in prison for, and therefore might be predators in our society. We don't know. So, but that's an example where you need to make changes on more on the margins than anything else. You need to streamline the process so people don't have to wait for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years just to get a green card. If you could streamline the process so that a person that we apparently need, we need workers. That's what everybody keeps saying. We need people to come to this country and work. We need them, whether it's to work in the fields or at McDonald's. We need people to come here. Fine. Then streamline the process so it doesn't take any more than 6 months to get a green card. And I think that you're going to find that the coyotes and the people like that are going to dry up, because there's not going to be any more money in it, because nobody's going to pay a coyote $5,000 to get them into the United States if all they have to do is fill out some paperwork, wait a couple of months, and they can come by themselves. So, but that's, an example where the changes are on the margins. You get up in the morning, you don't look and say, you know what, I got a problem with my car, so therefore I got to change my whole life. I've got to get a divorce, sell my house, sell my car, quit my job. No. There's a problem with the car, you get the car fixed. That's being realistic. And the difference between being realistic and idealistic. As far as California is concerned, there's fires. There's fires up north. There's fires down here in the south in the Malibu. Burned 40 some odd houses in Malibu. I don't know how many up north. There's a dozen or 24 people that have died in these fires. And it is looking as though that the cause of the fire, because that's what I keep waiting for, somebody to tell me what caused the fire. Now, a lot of politicians want to say it's global warming. So are they telling me that this is spontaneous combustion? That all of a sudden something just burst into flames? And if not, then there's another cause. Either it was arson or it was some sort of an accident. Maybe somebody threw a cigarette butt out or whatever. And what it's looking like is that it was an accident, but an accident that can be traced to the utilities. PG&E in the north, Southern California Edison in the south. And that their equipment may very well have started these fires. Now, you would think then, okay, their equipment started it, so they should get sued. They should end up paying for damages, on and on and on. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. The reason, the people that you would go after here are the political parties, the politicians. Why? Because these industries are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. They're regulated. The politicians came to us and said, the American people of California, you need to let us regulate these evil, wicked capitalists, or they will destroy you. They will raise your prices. They will gyp you on energy. They will neglect all of the equipment and end up creating all kinds of disaster. Well, what do we have now? disaster. But the different thing is that none of the politicians, none of the bureaucrats, the regulators are going to take the blame for it. None of them. They're going to point the fingers at SCE. They're going to point the fingers at PG&E and encourage people to go ahead and take civil action against those organizations, when no civil action should be forthcoming against Southern California Edison or PG&E. It should be against the state of California, the California Public Utilities Commission, etc., because those are the people that were supposed to keep us safe. They were the ones that promised, give us power, give us tax money, and we will make sure you don't suffer disasters. And yet, here it is. And this isn't the first time. It happens over and over and over again. I think last year we had a problem where Southern California Edison had some kind of, it was a wind event. Lots of high winds, a power line went over, the sparks started a wildfire. And again, we had a disaster. And again, it was Southern California Edison that was blamed for this rather than the regulators. The regulators, the people that are supposed to be accepting responsibility for the behavior of the utilities, escaped blame. It's wrong, and it shouldn't happen. Okay, so today I'm going to be reading from Ayn Rand's lexicon, also from the 10 books that screwed up the world and 5 that didn't help, and 10 books that every conservative must read when I come back. Okay, thank you very much. And the Ayn Rand lexicon, where she is dealing with various important concepts. Last time we were dealing with consumerism, and actually it was, what was the last one here? There it is. Consumerism. And now is consumption. Consumption is the final, not the efficient cause of production. The efficient cause is savings, which can be said to represent the opposite of consumption. They represent unconsumed goods. Consumption is the end of production and a dead end, as far as the productive process is concerned. The worker who produces so little that he consumes everything he earns carries his own weight economically, but contributes nothing to future production. The worker who has a modest savings account and the millionaire who invests a fortune, and all the men in between, are those who finance the future. The man who consumes without producing is a parasite, whether he is a welfare recipient or a rich playboy. Trained in college to believe that to look beyond the immediate moment, to look for causes or to foresee consequences is impossible, modern men have developed context dropping as their normal method of cognition. Observing a bad, small-town shopkeeper, the kind who is doomed to fail, they believe, as he does, that lack of customers is his only problem, and that the question of the goods he sells, or where these goods come from, has nothing to do with it. The goods, they believe, are here and will always be here. Therefore, they conclude the consumer, not the producer, is the motor of an economy. Let us extend credit, i.e. our savings, to the consumers, they advise, in order to expand the market for our goods. But, in fact, consumers, qua consumers, are not part of anyone's market. Qua consumers, they are irrelevant to economics. Nature does not grant anyone an innate title of consumer. It is a title that has to be earned by production. Only producers constitute a market. Only men who trade products or services for products or services. In the role of producers, they represent a market's supply. In the role of consumers, they represent a market's demand. The law of supply and demand has an implicit subclause that it involves the same people in both capacities. When this subclause is forgotten, ignored, or evaded, you get the economic situation of today. So, and that was the Ayn Rand lexicon. And when I come back, we're going to be reading from the 10 books that screwed up the world and 5 that didn't help. Thank you very much. The 10 Books That Screwed Up the World, 5 That Didn't Help by Benjamin Wiker. And we're dealing with Rousseau's book about equality. Rousseau used the Academy's question about inequality as a pretext to push his reasoning in the first discourse to the extreme. In an effort to find natural man, man as he is in the state of nature, the philosophers who have examined the foundations of society, let's try it again, quote, the philosophers who have examined the foundations of society have all felt the necessity of going back to the state of nature, but none of them has reached it, unquote, declared Rousseau, obviously having Thomas Hobbes' efforts in mind, as well as those of John Locke. But Rousseau's differences with Hobbes shouldn't blind us to the great similarities. To begin with, as Hobbes, we find ourselves in a powerful fiction, as imaginary time sketched by the author that allegedly provides such great insight into what human nature really is. Rousseau seems to call attention to this fiction when he warns the reader that he is, quote, setting all the facts aside, unquote, and that what he has to say, quote, must not be taken for historical truths, but only for hypothetical and conditional reasonings, unquote. Yet one can easily suspect Rousseau of Machiavellian duplicity. He knew full well that what he had to say smacked of heresy, and he had no wish to tangle with the church authorities. But Rousseau's little deceit aside, we must stress the point that, given the state of historical and anthropological researches at the time, his picture of primitive or natural man can only have been painted from his own imagination. We stress this because it proves to be a pattern for many modern intellectuals. Their imaginations run away with them, and they run away with their imaginations. They fashion a utopia in the distance, either in the mists of the distant past or the sunlit slopes of the distant future. By the power of their words, they drive otherwise sane and healthy men and women to waste their own lives and the lives of countless others, sometimes to the ruination of their countries. What then did Rousseau imagine? If we might be a bit glib, whereas Hobbes' men in the state of nature were gorillas, nasty, brutish, and curiously short, Rousseau's primitive men were suave, peaceful, innocent, carefree, and cheerfully libidinous bonobos. Rousseau, therefore, gave us a new Adam, a carefree, make-love-not-war ancestral archetype who became the societal ideal of the free love movements. According to Rousseau, natural men, quote, in the primitive state, unquote, had, quote, neither houses nor huts nor property of any kind, unquote. Indeed, they were little more than animals. They had no language. They were creatures of the senses, not of reason. As in Hobbes' vision, these original human beings were naturally solitary. Neither love nor the family was natural. Quote, males and females united fortuitously, depending on encounter, occasion, and desire, unquote. And, quote, they left each other with the same ease, unquote. Rousseau goes as far in his imaginative destruction of love in the family that he denies even the love of mother and child. Quote, the mother nursed her children at first for her own need, then, habit having endeared them to her, she nourished them afterwards for their need. As soon as they had the strength to seek their food, they did not delay in leaving the mother herself, and as there was practically no other way to find one another again than not to lose sight of each other in the jungle or forest, they were soon at a point of not even recognizing one another. And the father? Well, as it turns out, the concepts of fatherhood and moral duty, even the concept of love, are artificial contrivances that arise only after men have declined from the morality-free primitive state. How so? Primitive men and women acted only on sexual impulse. Quote, everyone peaceably waits for the impulsion of nature, yields to it without choice, and with more pleasure than frenzy, and the need satisfied, all desire is extinguished, unquote. In other words, one-night stands didn't even last one night. Happily, primitive people weren't picky, because man is so primitive, he had no idea of beauty. Quote, any woman is good for him, unquote. As for his string of offspring, given that he's off into the trees once his need is satisfied, he did not recognize his children, even if he happened to stumble upon them later on. There you have it, Rousseau's paradise, his new and improved Adam and Eve, sex entirely devoid of all the unpleasant duties and entanglements of love, a mere blind inclination devoid of any sentiment of the heart, that produces, quote, only a purely animal act, unquote, satisfying a passing brute desire, and when the desire is quenched, quote, the two sexes no longer recognized each other, and even the child no longer meant anything to his mother as soon as he could do without her, unquote. Every cad's paradise. Paternity without strings, no pestiferous pangs of conscience. There were no twinges of conscience for natural man, Rousseau assured the reader, because, quote, the moral element of love is an artificial sentiment born of the usage of society, unquote. Since neither the love of husband and wife or parent and child is natural, then neither are the moral duties that arise from marriage and childbearing. Rousseau added, with more than a little hint of autobiography, that the moral element of love is an artificial sentiment extolled with much skill and care by women in order to establish their ascendancy and make dominant the sex that ought to obey. Had he stopped there, Rousseau would be celebrated merely as the father of the 19th century randy intellectual rogue who lured naive high society women into believing a philosophy that made them his willing sexual prey. Quote, sex is natural, the chains of morality are not. Madam, let us throw off these shackles and recover our lost innocence, unquote. Such is true, but because Rousseau was a profound thinker, the damage goes far deeper. Not just sexual morality, but all morality was unnatural. For, quote, men in that primitive state, unquote, were entirely amoral, as they did not have, quote, among themselves any kind of moral relationship or known duties. They could be either neither good nor evil, and had neither vices nor virtues, unquote. Morality is therefore purely artificial. It develops only with society. Because society itself is not natural, neither is morality. Quote, savages are not evil, unquote, Rousseau asserts. Quote, precisely because they do not know what it is to be good, unquote. But society is not just unnatural, it's actually bad. As Rousseau made clear in his first discourse, the development of society, the development of the human being beyond mere isolated animal existence, constitutes man's fall from idyllic, original, natural happiness into the morbid, vicious, entangling miseries of civilization, a tragic descent from natural freedom to artificial servitude. Quote, everyone must see, unquote, says Rousseau, that, quote, that the bonds of servitude are formed only from the mutual dependence of men and the reciprocal needs that unite them, unquote. But in the state of nature, each man is entirely independent. The artificial chains of society, quote, did not exist in the state of nature, unquote. Therefore, quote, each man there, quote, was, quote, free of the yoke. So, let's see here. Now we got quite a few more pages here. So, and you can see with Rousseau that, again, this is the building blocks for, as the author has mentioned, what was euphemistically called the sexual revolution in the 60s, the if it feels good, do it movement, because basically that's what Rousseau is advocating. You could say that Rousseau was the world's first hippie. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the 10 books that every conservative must read. Thank you very much. And another book by Benjamin Wiker is The 10 Books That Every Conservative Must Read. And we're at chapter 1, The Politics by Aristotle. And the quote is, man is by nature a political animal. Aristotle, the father of political conservatism. Calling Aristotle the father of political conservatism should give conservatives a feeling of great relief. Conservatism is much older than America. It is not a modern invention. It goes back far earlier and far deeper, and that gives it a far firmer foundation and an even grander pedigree, stretching to ancient Greece. Conservatism is a perennial political philosophy, and its founding text is Aristotle's Politics. Aristotle is the father of political conservative in two important related senses. First, he understood that the decisive political argument occurs between those who maintain that political life and morality are natural and those who assert that political life and morality are entirely man-made, as did the sophists and the political innovators of his day. This argument is still with us, and as we'll see, it marks the crucial difference between conservatives and liberals. Conservatives tend toward political caution because they believe man is not infinitely malleable, and they believe that morality is objective and puts limits on what human beings can and should do. Liberals tend to believe the reverse, that morality is relative and that man is malleable and can rightfully be subject to political manipulation to advance some heady notion of the common good or expedite some grand progressive project. Conservatives like Aristotle prefer experience to theory. In fact, conservatives cringe at utopian philosophical schemes, which liberals tend to embrace because they vivify or justify their efforts at social engineering. And like Aristotle, conservatives generally accept the world as it is. They distrust the politics of abstract reason, that is, reason divorced from experience. Liberals see no problem with reconstituting a nation's political life on the basis of some attractive but untried rational scheme used as a tempting template to draw up programs of hope and change. But while the conservative disposition, which we can trace to Aristotle, is suspicious of abstract reason, it is not, obviously, hostile to philosophy. Aristotle remains, after all, one of the handful of great philosophers in human history, and history has preserved only a portion of his works, which range widely from detailed biological treatises such as The Parts of Animals and The Generation of Animals, an examination of the soul, works on respiration and youth and old age, to his seminal works on logic and language, such as The Categories and On Interpretation. More general treatises on nature like The Physics and On the Heavens, books on rhetoric and poetics, an expression of the principles of ethics, and the most abstract principles of metaphysics. Conservatives aren't anti-intellectual. They simply and solidly demand that our reason be firmly tethered to our experience of reality as it is. So far, conservatives like Aristotle, the practice of philosophy, the seeking of wisdom, involves the study of things as they are, not as we might like them to be, and that includes the study of human beings and political life. That is why Aristotle asserted that young men aren't good hearers of lectures on politics. They don't have enough actual experience of human nature and political life. And since they're passionate, they're prone to passionate and destructive schemes for overhauling society. A short overview of Aristotle's life reveals that, for him, experience and philosophy went together. Let me see if I can find there's one part in here. Let me see much all it's saying. Okay, it might be in this area right here. So, the man-made, and what he's touching on too here is about life and morality being entirely man-made versus being natural. Is there's two realities. There is metaphysical, i.e., natural reality, and there are man-made realities. A mountain is a metaphysical reality, whereas a skyscraper is a man-made reality. So, that's what he's getting at right there. And then the idea that morality is relative, and versus conservatives who believe that man is not infinitely malleable, and they believe that morality is objective and puts limits on what human beings can and should do. And again, I think that states very well, pretty much it's restating the same position I made in my monologue in terms of the differences between the left and the right, between the idealists and the realists in our society. So that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, I thank you for listening and have a great day.